Family, we made it to our final TLR at home of the semester. My name's Caleb Morgan and I serve on the TLR team here, and I'm so glad that you decided, whether in your bedroom by yourself or in the living room with your crew, to join us tonight for TLR at home. A couple things I want to let you know about before we hop into service. The first is that if it's your first time, hello, welcome. This is not typically how we meet, but we'd love a chance to get to meet you, even if it's virtually. So head to the description, text TLRGUEST to that number, and we'd love a chance to get to meet you virtually or in person next week here for our normal services, which is dinner at 7 and service at 7:30. A couple more things first. We've been telling you all month, all weeks, the past couple weeks about Home Night. Home Night is coming up at the end of this month on April 26th, and guys, you do not want to miss this. And I know you've probably heard that phrase like a million bajillion times from everywhere. Like, you don't want to miss this, this is the best one. But like, Home Night is one of the things that you just can't describe. It's just so special. You have to experience it for yourself. It's hard to put into words. It's when we, as a TLR family, celebrate with our friends who have decided to take the next step in their faith through baptism. So show up, bring your friends, bring your family, bring your dogs. Don't bring your dogs, we don't have dog care. But just come with the crew and let's just have a blast. Experience Home Night for yourself. And the second and final thing before we hop into it is that Easter is this Sunday, and Woodstock City Church has 5 Easter services available for you to attend. But we also know that most of you on Sunday mornings have your traditions. You've got the services that you attend with your family, and you've got your afternoon lunches, and we don't want to get in the way of those traditions, but we'd still love a chance to get to meet you. So TLR is raiding the 6:30 service on Saturday night. So show up, let's scare the adults, let's just come in numbers, and we'd love a chance to get to connect with you, sit with you, and enjoy Easter with you. So again, Saturday, 6:30, join us, come say hey, and we'd love to celebrate Easter with you. Well, that's all I've got. In a little bit, Matt Hayes, our director, is going to be leading a conversation with Ben Ramsey, who I'm sure you've seen before, and Jordan Castardi, host team. Y'all better be making some noise for her right now. Jordan Castardi, our team, is gonna start a conversation that will continue for the next couple weeks, but I'll let Matt tell you more about it later. And before we get to that, we're gonna celebrate with a time of worship. And trust me, y'all, I'm a worship leader. I think I'm actually singing this first song. Worship can be really weird through a screen, like especially when you're by yourself in your dorm room and it's just your laptop and it's like, I don't know how to worship, or if you're not confident in like your singing voice and you're standing around people, which by the way, just turn up the TV and no one will hear you. But whatever you need to do, you have the permission to do that. Whether you just need to sit and watch and let the words be sung over you, or whether you're just standing silently, reading along, keeping up, or whether you're up crazy wild like you front row people, just having a blast. Whatever you need to do, one of the best pieces of worship comes when it's authentic. So find whatever is authentic to you tonight and lean in that way in worship as we take a look back at one of our favorite worship moments from this semester, when we got to have an Ash Wednesday night of worship with our entire church. So we're gonna throw that recording on the screen. You guys, it's just 2 songs. Don't worry, it'll go quick. Lean in, have fun with us, and worship however is authentic to you.
There's a grace when the heart is under fire. Another way when the walls are closing in. And when I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone.
Come on, church.
There was another. Should I ever need reminding of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears the burden where another died for me. There is another in the fire. And all my dead left for dead beneath the waters. I'm no longer a slave to my sin anymore. And should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning, either way I won't bow to the things of this world. And this we know, and I know I will never be alone. There is another in the fire, standing next to me. There is another in the water, holding back the seas. And should I ever need reminding, the power set me free. There is a grave that holds nobody. Now that power lives in me. There is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the fire. Oh, there is another in the I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness bows to hell. I can hear the roar in the heavens as the space between us. I can feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. Nothing stands between us. Nothing stands between us. There is no other name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through hell. So come and make the space between all call you healer. You can mend any broken heart. I call you faithful Father. You finish everything you start. My soul was made. What was it made to do? To respond. Come on, let's sing. I know you. I know you by 1,000 names, and you deserve every single one. You've given me a million ways to be amazed at what you've done, and I am lost in wonder at all you do. I know you by 1,000 names, and I'll sing them back to the only one worthy. Ooh, he's the only one worthy. So we sing them all back. Your love is boundless, beyond what I could dream. Your grace is patient, 'cause you're never giving up on me. I call you bondage breaker, 'cause you're handing out the prison keys. My soul was made to be free.
What's up, TLR? We're so excited that you're joining in with us, no matter where you are, because it's not here. So if you're with a huge group of people, if you're by yourself, if you're at a watch party, welcome to TLR at home. And so we're really excited today because we're going to kick off a conversation around this series of the next 3 weeks called The S Word. And really what I'm excited about is we're going to have a conversation with Jordan and Ben. You know them. You need to know Jordan more. That's really the purpose of this conversation. You need to know her more. But we're going to have a conversation around sin. That is the S word that we're talking about, just for clarity. To really kickstart this conversation that hopefully you can have, but also that we're going to have over the next few weeks. So we're just going to have a convo ourselves, and you're going to get to watch and be a part of it, and then hopefully have some questions yourself, or you can have a conversation after. So, hey guys.
Hey,
Matt. Hey, you made it.
Good
job.
we're here.
All right, so let's start. Let's just jump in. Y'all good to just dive in?
I'm ready for it.
Cool. What's your favorite sin? I'm just kidding. Don't. That's not. No.
Slothfulness.
You went there. That's good.
Be a little lazy.
Yeah, lazy.
Yes.
I can take a nap
Sleeping.
every day.
Mine's gluttony.
That.
Yeah, like
'Cause-
food. I just love food. Who doesn't love food?
About to
Except
say.
cheese.
Yeah, except cheese. Yeah, but I will eat pizza for every meal.
See.
Yeah.
He's a conundrum.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are two examples of like those actually are categorized as
Yeah,
sins.
yeah.
But I love to eat too. But no, to kind of jump in, I think one of the most important things is to give a clear definition between two different aspects in this conversation. So can you define the difference for me between sin and temptation? So there's two facets to this conversation, but they're not the same thing. So how do you define the difference between the two of those?
Yeah, I would sort of start off answering that question by, and I feel like for the beginning of the series, we need to define, before we go between difference between sin and temptation, let's define sin, like what sin is and what we believe sin to be. Again, this is in a dictionary definition. It's sort of, what comes to mind when I think about
Better
sin.
be right.
Yeah. Fact check me. But I believe sin to be anything that breaks your relationship between you and God or you and other people. So anything that breaks a relationship between you and God and you and people. So, and there's a plethora of ways that can happen. But that in my mind is what sin is.
And it's clear to understand it's not just something you do against God.
Yep.
Like Scripture is very actually clear about the fact that it's also what you do to other people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just this, but I didn't do anything, like it wasn't against God, but
Right.
It's the relationship between him and you, or also you and someone else.
Yep.
That's good.
Temptation, I would say, is more along the lines of like luring you closer to the sin. So like your flesh and your desires luring you closer to the action of sin.
Yeah, and that's sort of how I would define the difference between the two, or the whereas sin is an action, it's something that you do, and that doesn't necessarily mean just physically. That could be a thought, that could be words. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical action, but sin is something an action that you do, whereas temptation is a desire. It's something that sort of wells up inside of you that causes you to sin. And so temptation and sin, I think that's a really important distinction. Temptation and sin are not the same thing.
Right.
Temptation is what happens before sin.
Right.
And so I think that's really important to distinguish between the two.
And even understand, like, so within our faith, we believe that Jesus never sinned, but Jesus was very clearly tempted.
Yep.
And that's part of the empathy we see with him as our Savior, as our King, is that he also experienced what we did. He knows the struggles and the trials we've gone through, and yet through all of them, he did not fall to breaking that relationship with God or with others. I love that you began with that, though, because I've heard many people say, but the last one I heard say it was Craig Rochelle, of you cannot defeat what you cannot define. And so not knowing what sin is, you're never going to be able to overcome it if you don't even know how to categorize it at the beginning, which is huge. So then if temptation and sin are different, and if one is kind of the predecessor to the other, where does temptation come from? Like, how do you get tempted? Like, how do you see what that even looks like? Where does it come from?
So John Mark Comer has a book called Live No Lies. And in that book, he goes through 3 buckets that I think really temptation falls in one of those buckets. They're the world, the flesh, and the devil. And so I think as we're talking about this, we can probably categorize temptation, and it's coming from one of those 3 buckets.
Yeah, and I would sort of elaborate on that, and like the world being like just culture, and where culture is going,
Right.
the culture of the times. It is. There's definitely a culture that's going very different from where a follower of Jesus is trying to walk. And so sometimes it feels like we're swimming upstream, but you can be tempted to sort of follow the ways of the world.
You said it's like a pull.
Yeah.
I mean, that would
Lord.
be very connected to a pull.
Yeah, yeah. And then to the flesh side of it, sort of this personal desire. I mean, that's something that's been in existence since the fall. Since the first, Adam and Eve sinned, took a bite out of the apple. Deceived by the serpent, and that's just a part of human nature. There's something in us that just we don't believe that God has what's best for us, and so we decide that we know what's best for us, and that's where that temptation.
And it's a desire, but it's a distorted desire.
Right.
It's not even to differentiate that of like, yeah, you have desires. Your desire is not a sin. Your desire on its surface isn't even temptation. It's a distorted one that pulls into the lure of yourself.
It's crazy to think about in the garden when the serpent was talking to Eve. It wasn't like, go eat this fruit or go do this thing. He wasn't telling her to go do this thing. It was a distorted idea of, did God really say you couldn't eat from that? So it's like that distorted idea that you're saying of where it all started.
Yeah, and then with if you're watching right now or listening and you're like, serpent talking, what are you talking about? There is this whether you consider the big creation account literal or if it's poetry or more symbolic, whatever. The fact of the matter is, the third category that you mentioned was there is an enemy. There, you might be called Satan, devil, whatever. There is an enemy that is at work, and it is trying to prevent people from having a relationship with Jesus, having a relationship with God.
Which that's
his goal.
the sin.
Yeah, his goal is to steal, kill, and destroy, and the way he does that is through temptation and then through sin. That breaks that relationship with our Heavenly Father.
Yeah,
so,
he's the one in the account of Matthew right before Jesus begins his ministry.
Yep.
He's the one who's tempting Jesus in the wilderness. He's the one who's tempting Eve in the garden, Adam in the garden. He's the one who is orchestrating all of these lies. He's a deceiver.
Yep.
And so what he's going to do is deceive you of those desires to pull you into separating yourself from what God would want for you, from what we say all the time of the more and better life than you could ever dream of. That's only going to be found in surrendering and following Jesus. It's the surrender and obedience, not the sin and the disobedience to what he wants for you. It's a huge distinction. So if you talk about it in that lens, really you're bringing in this factor of it's a spiritual thing.
for sure.
Like, it's easy for us to see in the physical realm. It's easy for us to understand sin or even temptation through what we can see, what we can feel, like our senses whenever they're activated. But the spiritual realm, you don't really have a lot of that, and yet this is a spiritual attack. It's a spiritual thing. Do y'all have any stories or any times when you can look back to your past and been like, that was what temptation looked like? That's when I found myself like, whoa, okay, if I keep going down this path, it will become sin and disobedience.
Yeah, I don't have a specific story, but one thing that I do know is there's sort of states of mind or states of like my physical being that I'm in when I find temptation being the strongest. And that's when I'm hungry. Talk about glutton. Yeah. When I'm hungry, I get more like hangry.
You're
honestly.
hangry. That's the word,
yeah. When I'm hungry, when I'm tired, when I'm like have had little sleep or my sleep schedule is off, I find that temptation is really strong in my life. Like it's stronger than normal. Or when I'm like stressed out. When I feel like I'm just like at capacity, temptation for me just like shoots through the roof. There's just something about I think being in. Maybe another one would be like when I'm alone.
Yep.
When I'm alone, like temptation, when there's no one around me that can like speak truth into me or speak life into me, or that I can share with. Like I feel like that's when temptation for me is the strongest. Those are the environments that I've experienced temptation the most.
Yeah, I was gonna say, at night, and when I'm alone. So if there are times that my husband is gone, on a work trip, and I am at home and alone, the thoughts, the distorted ideas start coming in, and if I can if I don't stop them, they will continue down a path that just leads to fear.
It's interesting, the connecting piece between those two things you just said is that it's in the secret and in the darkness, right? Both of those,
Yep.
sin likes to be concealed, right? It doesn't like to be in the light because the moment it comes out of light and it's seen, it's exposed, that's when it gets eradicated.
Yeah.
There's so much within the way you deal with it. We're going to talk about in the next few weeks, but it's a huge designation to say. Really, it's going to happen in those moments when you're tired, when you're hungry or hangry, when you're stressed, when you're alone. And this is what I think is true. It's when you're disconnected. When you are disconnected from the source of life, that is when you are so more apt to becoming susceptible towards that temptation just ruling you and becoming sin.
I'd also say distraction is a big one. I think the enemy tries to distract us from what you're saying and uses that to, hey, let me get you off course a little bit.
Yeah, because he's thinking even just this one little thing, it's a slippery slope.
Yep.
So if you're willing to be vulnerable, when you were in college, where'd you go to college?
KSU.
I'm
right.
trying. It's like, I don't know. Isn't that what they do?
Yeah.
It's unnatural for you still.
It's very strange. I'm trying.
Wait, where'd you guys go?
We went to UGA.
Go Dogs.
That's right.
Yep.
It's okay.
Wait, were you guys in March Madness this year?
So,
Or-
my question about your time
Savage.
in college, Jordan, when you were in college, what were some of the biggest temptations that you faced?
I dated she's my wife, Madeline. We dated all throughout college. And so, I mean, one of the biggest temptations that I think any college student faces is, especially if you're in a dating relationship, is like physical boundaries, crossing physical boundaries. That was a big temptation for us, but which we got to talk about the last couple weeks at TLR. So go watch those messages on YouTube. Riz, Rose, and Red Flags. But yeah, I would say a temptation that I experienced a lot in college, and I think it's this season of life, I think you experience this a lot, is just the temptation of control. The temptation that I had control over my life, and I had to figure out my life. And what that led to, honestly, was the lack of trust that God was in control, that He knew what was ahead of me, that I could trust that. And so I feel like a lot of the decisions I made in college were filled with anxiety and stress because I had this sort of closed-fisted, like, I've got to figure this out, as opposed to, and that was the temptation of having control. And so, as opposed to, being open-handed with my future in college. And so that was definitely something that I had to learn, and honestly still struggle with today, the temptation that my life is in my hands. I can, determine where I'm headed, and, there's so much that's out of my control that I gotta trust the Lord with. So
It's funny, the one that I thought of for college, I also probably still struggle with a lot too, and it's the temptation to believe the lie that I am what I have, and buying into the trendy, the material things, the up and coming, whatever it is. And I think buying those things is not the sin, it's the root behind it. It's the jealousy, it's the envy, it's the look at what they have and I don't have.
Comparison.
Yeah, the comparison of the root of it. So that's something I struggle with today. But then there also, on another side, I dealt with the temptation of that I always had to be drinking at parties. So that was a big one for me.
Like, there's a rule.
It was like, I'm not going to have fun if I'm not drinking. And I think I probably would have made a lot of more wise choices if I didn't do that.
Said everyone ever.
Yep.
Who's ever been in college.
Yep.
I know. On the other side of it, here we are. It's interesting, though, that everything that y'all just laid out of the stories, even the small stories in the college, the truth is all of those things are still rooted in that beginning piece. It's that trust in God, with Him as your ultimate authority, that He's going to take care of you, that He's got what's best for you, and that you have everything you need in Him. I mean, that is the core lie that's being spoken into our hearts at every moment whenever that temptation comes. It's how He's going to attack, whether it's through control or through physical boundaries, whether it's through envy, jealousy, greed, comparison. It's that questioning of whether or not I can trust Him. Does He have this? And that's I think that's really hard when you're in college.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a young
Sure.
20-something and everything's in front of you and everyone's talking about your future, that becomes a temptation so fast. Just to go like, I gotta decide. I gotta make it. It's all in my hands, and you start just freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
I think God would be like, hey, I got you.
I got you. Yep.
I'm not freaking out. You don't need to either. But it's definitely a true temptation. So then if we shift from temptation, which again, temptation being the prerequisite to sin, why is sin such a big deal? Like why within our faith is this something that is so massive, and yet we don't ever like to talk about it because it likes to stay concealed, likes to stay in the dark. Nobody likes to talk about the fact they're not perfect, they're dirty, or they've done things. But why is it such a big deal? And is there a way that you can see sin affect your life tangibly whenever it's found its way into your rhythms and into your life?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the definition we had of sin earlier, the fact that it is anything that you do that would break your relationship with God or cause broken relationships with other people. I think the reason why sin is such a big deal is because sin leads to death. And
what do you mean by death? Because this
Yes.
is a lot of people are going to hear death, like I'm going to die because I looked at porn.
Yeah.
Like, so elaborate on that a little bit.
Right, right. So, spoiler alert, we all will die physically. Okay, we all
Wait a
will
minute.
die physically.
What?
Yeah, yeah. And one thing that's interesting is that our culture, especially Western culture, we don't like to talk about that. We don't like to talk about physical death, and we want to avoid it. And so, that's the reason why we make a lot of decisions we do. There's sort of this hyper focus on like your 20s and 30s being like,
Live it up.
live it up, whatever. And, we neglect to a degree like the later seasons of life because we don't want to think about that. We don't want to think about our mortality. And so, but that's a part of life. But what I mean by sin by death, or sin leading to death, is the fact that it leads to a spiritual death. If we want to get really into the gospel and why we talk about Jesus all the time and what he did, if a life of sin and a life of is going to lead to a life that is disconnected from our Heavenly Father, disconnected from God, and that when you are disconnected from God, that is death. That is a spiritual death. That is an isolation from the relationship that you were meant and created for. And so sin and those decisions that we make that break that relationship with the Father are going to lead to a disconnect between that relationship. And so that's what I mean by sin leading to death. And so that's why it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's why what Jesus on the cross is so is the thing.
It's everything.
Yeah, is everything when it comes to our faith.
That's how you find life.
Right.
Because otherwise, that's where you're going. That is the path it's leading towards.
Right. So not only is sin going to affect your now. I mean, I really do. I mean, there's consequences to sin. There's consequences to when we make those decisions that break that relationship and that trust between you and God and between you and other people. You will experience consequences in the here and now.
Right.
But ultimately, and the reason why, probably the bigger deal is that ultimately it leads to a separation between you and God. So.
When you're talking, it just reminded me of when Jesus comes, he says he's going to come to bring abundant life. And that abundant life is love, peace, and joy. And I think the sin and the temptation that leads to sin is only going to separate us from those things, which could also be another type of death here on earth. Like, if he came to earth to bring us love, joy, and peace, and the things that we're doing are causing fear, lust, and pride, then that in itself is a death here that we're not experiencing the full life that he came to give us.
Yeah.
I've heard Tim Mackey on our Tim Mackey Bible Project.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Ben, you're basically in school, with...
We're best friends.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. That's not true.
But Tim, if you're watching.
Yeah. Hey. But I've heard him explain, even to talk around, this is for another conversation, but where sin ultimately leads to death, and within Scripture, when you look at the end, what we would naturally say is when you end up with God, you're with him, you're in heaven. When you're not, you're in hell. And the reality of hell is that hell isn't this horror movie that Dante's 7 levels of whatever is made it out to be. Hell is truly a place where you get what you want. But if you're getting what you want, and what you want is your distorted desires and is the selfish pride of what you've been going after in your life, you will continue to devolve within yourself. Like, can you imagine a world where everyone is just allowed to pridefully go after and get everything that they want at whatever moment they want? Like, that is hell. And that is a separation of what God's trying to bring. And so if he's trying to bring love and joy and peace, and what he did on the cross is he gives you the transaction of him taking your pain, shame, and guilt to give you his love, joy, and peace. What he's saving you from is yourself and your pride. And that's why, like, the opposite of love is pride. It's a life lived about yourself, your desires, your wants, when you want it. All the natural things that we're born thinking, we're born wanting, that predisposition. That's why it's such a big deal, because otherwise you'll miss it.
Yeah.
If you never attack it, you'll miss it.
I think it's also really important to realize that that we all sin, and that is the reason that Jesus came.
Right.
Like, if we can't bridge the gap of why we need Jesus, then sin doesn't matter either. And so there's a gap there. Jesus came to fill it.
Yeah. You just got all apologetic on
Yeah.
this. I love it. Let's go. But it's even the other side of understanding. Like, you get into these patterns, you get into these rhythms, like, where you find yourself in more of that. Like, you're just like, I need a shower. Like, I just feel dirty. There's a darkness sitting. I've been making decisions. I know, that something's not right. So when you find yourself in those places, you find yourself feeling disconnected. You find yourself in that place of needing the forgiveness and the grace that is always going to be available. How do you get out of that pattern of sin in your life? How do you break that rhythm? How do you get out?
I think the examples that we gave, knowing that about yourself, if you can figure out what it is, like, if you're hangry, like, get some food,
Just go eat, dude.
If it's
Politics.
like me and it's like, I don't want to be at home by myself.
Yeah.
Find somebody to come hang out with you. The accountability piece of
It's
that.
a boundary.
Yeah.
It's just wisdom.
So just knowing what it is for you would help.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I also think that sort of work backwards. All right. When a life of sin, like we said, leads to death, like the spiritual death, and that can be hopeless. If you're living a life of sin, if I'm living a life of sin, and there's no reconciliation there, if I just think that this is how it is, that's going to lead to some, like, hopelessness and despair in my life. Because, again, I think the break in relationship, even if there's not a conscious, like, relationship between you and God, like, if you're still figuring that out, or, like, I don't necessarily believe that, you see the effects of sin. You see there's this internal conscience that we all have, that we realize something's wrong, something's messed up. And if we don't recognize the fact that we are in need of someone to do something about that, and we believe that person that did something is Jesus, like, we will continue just to live in hopelessness and despair. And so I think, to work backwards, I think, finding, sort of recognizing, sort of what sin is doing to our lives, and recognizing the fact that I am in need of someone to do something about it, and that person is Jesus. I think start there, because Jesus and his sacrifice for our sin, who established an ability for us to have a relationship with God, that restored that broken relationship that sin caused, that leads to a life that is not full of hopelessness and despair. It's full of love, joy, and peace. And so, understanding that,
Right.
but then working backwards, to say a strategy, to not live a life of sin is if temptation leads to sin, well, let's start at the beginning where, all right, when we're feeling temptation, when we are alone, when we are hungry, when we recognize we're stressed out or tired, in those moments, figuring out steps to better deal with our temptation. And that might be, changing your environment. You're alone at home and you're feeling temptation. Well, go for a walk. Just get outside.
I have a friend who, every time he felt tempted to look at something on the computer or whatever, he would like, I'm gonna go for a run.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why are you running so much? He's like, because you don't know my head, man.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I encouraged, I led a high school group of guys when I was in college, and one of the things we talked about a lot was the temptation of pornography. And one of the things that we talked about as a group was, hey, if you have your phone in your room when you go to bed at night,
Right.
a change of environment, just put your phone out in the hallway.
Yep.
But I need an alarm clock. Go get an alarm clock.
There are
They're
these
$10.
things called
Yeah,
alarm clocks. that
And
are
so,
made for
and
that.
so,
Yeah.
and so, yeah. In order to not sin, look at the temptation
Yeah.
and see and evaluate. Okay, when are the times I'm becoming tempted, and how can I change my environment, change
Yep.
what's
A
around
habit.
me, change a habit in order to not lead myself
And
into
I
sin.
think the overlay I'd put on that I figured out is you're never going to overcome your sin by focusing on your sin.
Yep.
Because you don't have the power to overcome your sin.
Yep.
The only way you can overcome your sin is by not focusing on your sin, it's by focusing on your Savior.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look to Jesus, because he's the only one who's going to give you the power to do that. And through, like, one of the rhythms and things you need to put into your, like, established, part of your daily routine is going to him, asking him for help, getting the wisdom from him to put yourself in situations where you can find that thing, There's so much more we can talk about this, and we will for the next 2 weeks.
Yep.
But I'm super grateful for your wisdom, for your vulnerability, your insight. I'm really excited for the conversation that we're going to get to have with y'all. We're going to keep this going in-house next week for S-Word Part 2. But what we love for you to do now is to have some conversation. We're going to put some questions up on the screen in the next few seconds after we leave, and then that's going to be a chance for you to have a conversation with the people around you. If you're at one of the watch parties, break up into smaller groups, have some conversation around these questions. If you're by yourself, write these down. Write down your answers. This can be a huge way that you can equip yourself to put yourself in wiser situations so that you can avoid falling into the S word as much as possible. But we love y'all, TLR. We're super excited for where we're going in this conversation, and we will see you here at the church, because that's where we are, in one of the rooms. Don't worry about it. We'll see you here next week. See you guys.